There is a floor in the Hargrove Tower that does not exist on any building directory. It is not listed in the elevator panel. It has no room numbers, no housekeeping schedule, and no record in the hotel's official system. The staff who know about it have been paid very well to forget it. And for 11 years, not a single camera on that floor has ever recorded a frame. Victoria Hargrove built that floor herself. She was 44 years old. The founder and CEO of Hargrove Hospitality Group, a woman whose name appeared on 17 hotels across the country and whose face had graced the covers of Forbes, Time, and Fortune within the same calendar year. She wore her dark blonde hair pulled back at every press conference, always in a charcoal blazer, always with the same controlled half-smile that journalists described as calculated warmth. She had built her empire from nothing, a single motel in Ohio she had inherited from her father at 22, leveraged into a loan, then another loan, then a chain, then a dynasty. She had never been soft. She had never been careless. She had never, in 22 years of business, made a mistake she didn't recover from until the night of March 14th. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Victoria was in her corner suite on the 32nd floor of her own flagship hotel, the one she always stayed in when visiting New York. She had just finished reviewing the acquisition documents for a boutique resort in the Maldives, a deal worth close to $200 million, when her private cell rang. The number was blocked. She answered anyway. She always answered blocked calls. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. "Ms. Hargrove, I think you should take a walk up to the 41st floor tonight. Use the private elevator. Go alone, don't tell anyone." "Who is this?" she asked. "Someone who knows what you keep up there." The line went dead. Victoria sat very still for exactly 30 seconds. Then she stood, slipped on her shoes, and walked to the private elevator at the end of the hallway, the one that required a key card that only 4 people in the world possessed. She pressed 41. The 41st floor smelled like cedar and old paper. It always had. Victoria had designed it that way intentionally, a sensory trigger, a reminder of her father's office when she was a child, before everything went wrong and then right again, and then catastrophically, irreversibly wrong in ways she had spent her entire adult life trying to correct. The floor had 8 rooms. Each one was sealed with a biometric lock registered only to her. There were no cameras by her explicit and very expensive instruction, a fact that required the cooperation of 3 different contractors, 1 private security firm, and a very quiet conversation with the hotel's head of IT, a man named Gerald who now drove a very nice car. She moved down the corridor, her heels silent on the thick carpet, checking each door, sealed, 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 sealed. The 5th room, the one she privately called the archive, had its door open by exactly 2 inches. Victoria stopped breathing. She pushed the door open. The room was undisturbed. The filing cabinets were locked. The framed photographs on the wall, the ones she never let anyone see, were still in their places. But on the desk, laid flat and perfectly centered, was a single photograph. It was a photograph of her, taken from inside this room. Her first thought was Gerald. Her second thought was Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was the kind of man who moved through the business world the way a shark moves through water, not violently, but inevitably. He was the lead investor in a rival group that had been quietly circling Hargrove Hospitality for 2 years. 3 months ago, he had made an offer to acquire the company. Victoria had declined in a letter that was, by her own admission, perhaps unnecessarily blunt. She had made an enemy. She sat in the archive room for 40 minutes, going through every file, checking every lock, reading every document. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. Whoever had been here had left no trace except that single photograph, which she now held in her hands, studying the angle, the focal length, the quality of light. It had been taken from the northwest corner of the room. There was nothing in that corner, just a wall, a ventilation grate, and she crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched down. Behind the ventilation grate, tucked with extraordinary precision, was a camera the size of a thumb drive. This is the moment, if you are watching, where most people would call the police. Victoria Hargrove called her attorney instead. Diana Cho had been her legal counsel for 16 years. She was the only person on earth who knew the full contents of the 41st floor, and she was the only person Victoria trusted without reservation or contingency. Diana picked up on the second ring, listened without interrupting for 4 minutes, and then said, in her perfectly level voice, "Don't touch the camera. Don't call anyone else. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 14. They stood together in the archive room, two women in the middle of the night, looking at a camera that had recorded God knows what for God knows how long. And Diana said the thing that Victoria had already been thinking but had refused to say out loud. Someone wants leverage. This isn't a theft. This is a setup. For what? The Maldives deal, Diana said. Sign that acquisition, your stock jumps 40%. Someone who knows what's in those files and can threaten to leak it. They don't want money, Victoria. They want you to walk away from the deal, or they want you to take a partner you didn't choose. Victoria looked at the files. 11 years of records. The archive wasn't criminal. She had checked. And Diana had triple-checked. And 2 other attorneys had confirmed it over the years. But it was private. It was the kind of private that, in the wrong hands, becomes a narrative. And in the age of narrative, a story doesn't have to be illegal to be destructive. It just has to be unexpected. Who has access to this floor? Diana asked. 4 people. Me, you, Gerald, and IT, and... She stopped. Diana looked at her. And James? Victoria said. James Hargrove was her younger brother. He was also, as of 8 months ago, no longer speaking to her. Their falling out had been quiet and total. It had been about their father's original motel, a property Victoria had sold 15 years ago to fund her first major expansion, a decision she had made alone without consulting James, who had been 18 at the time and, in her estimation, not yet capable of understanding the calculus of survival. James had recently learned the full details of that sale. He had learned specifically that their father had asked her in a letter, written 3 weeks before his death, to keep the property in the family. She had not kept the property in the family. She had built an empire instead. The letter was in the archive. Diana found James Hargrove within 6 hours through channels. Victoria preferred not to ask about. He was in New York. He had been in New York for 2 weeks. He was staying 4 blocks from the hotel. He came to the 41st floor the next morning because Victoria asked him to, and because despite everything, he still came when she asked. That was the thing about James. He was angry in the way that only people who love you deeply can be angry, the kind of anger that hasn't given up yet. He walked into the archive room and looked at the camera on the desk. Diana had removed it carefully, gloved, and then he looked at his sister. I didn't put that there, he said. I know, Victoria said. He blinked. You know? The angle. The placement. You would have put it somewhere smarter. A pause. And you would never have called me first. You would have just used it. James sat down in the chair across from her desk. He was 37 years old, and he looked, in that moment, very much like their father. The same jaw. The same way of pressing his mouth flat when he was processing something difficult. Webb, he said. We think so. How did he get access? Gerald in IT is driving a car he can't afford on his salary, Diana said from the doorway. James looked at the files on the desk. He looked at the framed photographs on the wall. Images Victoria had never shown him, never described. Images of their father and their childhood home and the original Hargrove Motel sign. Orange letters on a white background, the only thing their father had ever built with his own hands. His jaw tightened. What do you need? He said. What followed took 11 days. Diana built the case methodically. Gerald's bank records, the camera's manufacturing data, a digital trail from the device's firmware that led, through 3 shell companies and 1 offshore account, to a technology firm contracted exclusively by Webb Capital Group. It was not the kind of evidence that made headlines. It was the kind of evidence that made very quiet phone calls happen. The kind that end careers without anyone ever knowing exactly why. Marcus Webb withdrew his acquisition interest on a Tuesday afternoon, citing a strategic pivot in investment priorities. His attorney sent a letter. Diana sent a shorter letter back. Nothing else was said publicly. Nothing else needed to be. Gerald was let go with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement that Diana described with characteristic understatement as comprehensive. He did not fight it. He kept the car. Victoria signed the Maldives acquisition on a Thursday morning, in a room full of attorneys and witnesses, with cameras present, the regular kind, the ones she had approved. She went back to the 41st floor alone that evening. She stood in the archive room for a long time, looking at the photographs on the wall, her father's face, the motel sign, A photograph of herself at 22, standing in the parking lot of that Ohio motel in February, breath visible in the cold air, holding the keys like she wasn't sure what to do with them. She thought about the letter, the one asking her to keep the property. She had read it so many times over the years that she no longer needed to open the file to recall it. She could recite it word for word, in her father's handwriting, in his voice, which had been a quiet voice, a careful voice, the voice of a man who built things slowly and loved things deeply and never, in his entire life, built an empire or appeared on a magazine cover or signed a deal worth $200 million. She had given up the thing he loved to build the thing she loved. She had never been sure, in the years since, whether that was ambition or abandonment. She took the letter out of the file. She read it one more time. Then she walked out of the archive room, took the private elevator down to the lobby, crossed the marble floor of her flagship hotel, walked out the front doors onto the Manhattan sidewalk, got into a car, and drove to her brother's temporary apartment 4 blocks away. He opened the door before she knocked. He had been expecting her, maybe. Or maybe he had just been waiting. The way people wait when they've been hoping for something. Long enough that hope starts to feel like its own kind of watching. She handed him the letter. He read it. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "I was 22, she said finally. "I thought I was saving us." "I know," he said. "I should have told you. At the time, I should have." "Victoria," he stopped her. "Not unkindly, I know." He handed the letter back. She looked at it. Then she did something she had not done since the day she had stood in that parking lot in February with her father's keys and her father's debt and her father's impossible, specific, tender dream still warm in the air around her. She cried. Not the controlled, private kind of crying she allowed herself occasionally, alone in hotel rooms. The real kind. The kind that sounds ugly and feels enormous and doesn't resolve anything except the distance between two people who have been standing on opposite sides of a silence for too long. James put his arm around her. They stood in the doorway of his rented apartment in the city she had conquered. And she was no longer a CEO or an empire builder, or a woman whose face appeared on magazine covers. She was just his sister. She was just the girl from Ohio. She was just the person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally put it down. The 41st floor was repurposed 6 months later. The archive was moved to a secure legal facility. The rooms were renovated into a private event space available exclusively for charitable galas, a decision that earned Hargrove hospitality, a notable amount of goodwill and press coverage, which Victoria accepted with her familiar controlled half-smile, though people who knew her said, in the months after, that the smile looked different somehow. Warmer, less calculated. She and James had lunch every Sunday. They were building something new together, a smaller project, a family foundation in their father's name, focused on supporting independent hospitality businesses in rural communities. It would never appear on a Forbes cover. It would never generate a headline, but it was the kind of thing their father would have understood. And for Victoria Hargrove, that was enough. If you have watched until here, then you have seen that some things we hide. We hide them not because of weakness, but because of pain. If this story has touched you, then please like and subscribe to this channel, and send this video to those who think that success means walking alone, because the real story begins from the place where we finally stop.